After 22 long years, MotoGP was finally back in Brazil. You could feel the passion, the excitement. It was all perfectly set up to be this incredible fairy tale homecoming. But what actually happened? Well, it was something else entirely. It was a weekend that just spiraled from these massive hopes into a chaotic, dangerous, and let's be honest, an embarrassing farce. So let's break down exactly how it all went so wrong.
To really get a sense of just how bad things got, you don't need to look much further than the words of the riders themselves. KTM's Brad Binder described the track with this chilling line. A little stone festival. That paints a terrifying picture of what it was like out there, and it gets right to the heart of the weekend's biggest failure, a dangerously unprepared circuit.
So, how did a weekend that had so much promise go so spectacularly off the rails? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down the whole saga. We'll start with the excitement of that long-awaited return, then get into the cracks literally appearing in the asphalt, the absolute chaos on the grid, the incredible races that somehow still happened, and of course the big question, has this whole mess tarnished MotoGP's reputation?
All right, first up, let's just set the stage, because the promise of this event was immense. This was supposed to be so much more than just another race. It was a passionate homecoming built on decades of waiting.
You really have to understand the history here to get why this was such a big deal. The last time MotoGP raced at this specific track, Goiânia, was way back in 1989. Then you had a troubled one-off race at Interlagos in '92, and the last Grand Prix of any kind in Brazil was in Rio back in 2004. So yeah, this 2026 return, we're talking 22 years in the making.
And the fans? Oh, they responded exactly like you'd hope. Nearly 150,000 spectators showed up over the weekend. This wasn't just a big crowd, it was a powerful statement that proved there is a massive, untapped hunger for MotoGP in South America, a market that has felt, pretty neglected for a long time.
But, and this is a big but, there was this uncomfortable piece of history lurking in the background. See, this wasn't the first time a Brazilian GP had run into this kind of trouble. That 1992 race at Interlagos, it was also plagued by serious complaints from the riders about a bumpy and unsafe track. It was some seriously spooky foreshadowing for the problems that were about to pop up again in 2026.
And that brings us right to the heart of the problem. Part 2, cracks in the asphalt. This is where those old warnings became a modern-day reality, as a series of escalating disasters just tore the whole fairy tale weekend apart.
The problems started piling up almost immediately. On Friday, heavy rain caused massive flooding. The brand new drains were completely blocked, which just smeared this slick, red mud all over the racing surface, causing huge delays. Then Saturday got even worse. A sinkhole, opened up on the main straight, forcing an 80-minute delay to the sprint race. And then the final straw came on Sunday, minutes before the main event, when the asphalt itself started to break apart at a high-speed chicane.
All of this led to the absolute peak of the disorganization. Let's talk about the chaos on the grid and the unprecedented last-minute decision that threw the entire race into turmoil.
Okay, so just picture the scene, right? The bikes are all lined up on the grid, the riders are in the zone, the whole world is watching. And just minutes before the lights are supposed to go out, race direction announces they're slashing the race distance from 31 laps all the way down to just 23. They cut the race by nearly a third because the track was literally falling apart.
So you might be asking, why the weird number? Why 23 laps? Well, it's all about the rulebook. For a Grand Prix to count for full World Championship points, it has to complete at least 2/3 of its planned distance. That 23-lap number wasn't random. It was the absolute bare minimum they could run to make sure the race still counted. It was a calculated but totally desperate move.
But that calculation caused absolute havoc in the pits. KTM's Enea Bastianini, well, he didn't hold back. He said, "It was shit. The message to the teams arrived at the end during the last minute. We had no time to change the tires." And that was the thing. Some teams at the front heard the news and were frantically changing fuel maps and tires, but other teams further back were left completely in the dark. Their entire weekend strategy, instantly useless.
And yet, through all of this madness, a race still had to be run. Which brings us to Section 4, where we'll focus on the actual on-track action from the sprint and the Grand Prix. So on Saturday, after that bizarre delay for the sinkhole, it was Marc Marquez on the factory Ducati who just mastered the conditions. He hunted down the pole sitter, Fabio Di Gianantonio, who made a critical mistake with just 3 laps to go. That was all Marquez needed to sweep past and grab his first win of the 2026 season.
Jorge Martin brought it home in third for Aprilia.
But Sunday's shortened main event? Oh, that belonged to one man, Marco Bezzecchi. He delivered an absolute masterclass for the factory Aprilia team. He led from lights to flag to take a totally dominant victory. His teammate Jorge Martin came home in second to secure a commanding 1-2 finish for the team, with the super impressive Fabio Di Giannantonio rounding out the podium yet again.
And Bezzecchi's form was just undeniable. This win in Brazil was his fourth in a row, a streak that actually stretched back to the end of last season. Even more impressive, it took his total of consecutive laps led in a Grand Prix to over 100. He left Brazil as the clear, undisputed championship favorite.
But the story didn't end with the checkered flag, not by a long shot. Now we've got to move to the consequences of this chaotic weekend, the aftermath. We'll cover the rider injuries and the big shakeup in the championship.
Remember Brad Binder's Stone Festival? Well, it had very real and very dangerous consequences. Yamaha's Alex Rins finished the race with a badly swollen finger from getting hit by flying asphalt. Toprak Razgatlioglu literally had to empty chunks of the track out of his racing boots. All up and down the paddock, riders were coming back with bruises and sores from being pelted by debris. It was a completely, totally unacceptable level of risk.
And as you'd expect, a weekend this wild dramatically shook up the title fight. With that 25-point haul for the win, Marco Bezzecchi just vaulted into a commanding championship lead with 56 points. His teammate Jorge Martin now sits second, while the early leader Pedro Acosta dropped down to third. A huge shift in the standings after only the second round.
All of which brings us to our final and maybe most important section, a tarnish on MotoGP. Here, we're going to examine the fallout and the really tough questions about responsibility the sport is now facing. The frustration from inside the paddock was just immense. The veteran team principal for Trackhouse Aprilia, Davide Brivio, he summed it up perfectly. He basically said that while teams are being asked to invest more and raise their own professional standards, the championship itself failed to provide a safe, professional place to race. That is a powerful criticism coming from a highly respected figure.
And while it might be easy to just blame the local circuit organizers, the analysis is pretty clear that the ultimate responsibility lies higher up. It is the job of MotoGP's governing body to inspect and certify that every single venue is safe and ready for a World Championship event. And at Goiânia, they clearly and badly failed in that fundamental responsibility.
This chart really visualizes the core of the problem, right? On one side, you have the incredibly high safety and performance demands of a top-tier world championship. And on the other, you have the dangerously low level of readiness from the event itself. That gap between the two was just massive, and it created a weekend that felt like it was constantly on the brink of total disaster.
And so that leaves us with a really tough, forward-looking question. The Brazilian Grand Prix was a massive wake-up call. As MotoGP continues its ambitious global expansion into all these new markets, can it actually guarantee that it will uphold the fundamental standards of safety and professionalism that its teams, its riders, and its millions of fans don't just expect but absolutely demand?